Hello and welcome to Grief Inspired Live. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Catherine McNulty, and what we do here at Grief Inspired is get you talking about grief. We talk about the real stuff. We talk about what's going to happen if you don't know, and then once it's going to happen or has happened, then we talk about that too. But what I've come to realize in all of the times that, all of the times that I've spent in grief, right? So I have been grieving for 10 plus years. And what I know more than anything is that you cannot keep your grief to yourself, that you have to share it, that you have to talk about it, that you have to think about it, right? So it's easy to avoid. And so this is a format, this is a way for you to hear directly from my mouth and from the folks who participate in these discussions, these lives, what grief is really, really like. Good morning, Deb. So happy to have you here with me. You know all about grief, don't you? So this is today. This is part 2 of a 3-part series, and now I'm thinking, well, maybe I keep going with it. Maybe part 4, part 5, but it's all around healing from grief because I think that's what we all want to do. But before we jump into actually what's going to go on, I want to show you something and let you in a little bit into my world and the things that make me super happy. Because for me, the grief process was getting to my lowest point, the point where nothing seemed right in the world, nothing made sense anymore. All of the things that I used to think I knew about myself and my life and what I liked and what I didn't like about my life, that all sort of stood on its head and everything changed. And so ever since, my healing from grief has been really a bit of a self-discovery and deciding who I am, what I want to do in the world, what I actually like and what I dislike, and what are the things that really bring me happiness, right? Because we all want to be happy. That's the goal of all of this. So as you're going through your own grief process, I want you to take special note that if there's something that happens, no matter where you are in your grief process, it could be really early where things have just happened and you're crushed, or it could be, a year or 2 out, or it could be longer. But when something happens and you get that warm and fuzzy feeling inside, something that brings me joy, and it could be a warm cup of the right kind of coffee. It could be just the right kind of creamer that you get in your coffee. It could be anything, whatever it is. It could be a small thing. It could be a big thing. Take note of it and mark it down and add it to your "this brings me joy" list. And you need to know what those things are so that when you have setbacks, you can say, you know what, this brings me joy. I am going to spend some extra time today and do this. Maybe it's spending more time making yourself an extra cup of coffee. Maybe it's getting outside. Maybe it's doing something else. So for me, I have found, and I apologize, I'm like really sniffly today. I have found succulents. So check this out. I love succulents. And if you know me, I love playing in my garden, tinkering in my garden, because it's really therapeutic and it's healing. And I found I specifically like cactuses and succulents because you can't kill them. And the thing I love about them most, and I'm going to do this right now for you. I wish I could hold this up for you. But what I want to show you right here, and I'm just going to do this. I just decided. So if you notice right there on the front of this plant, let me see if I can hold it and show you at the same time. This little plant, it's an extra little piece that's growing. And the great thing about succulents is you can do this. I pinched this little guy off. And the miraculous thing about this is that from the inside of this succulent, this is going to grow an entire new plant. So it can be completely broken. Most people would throw this away, but this will become its own plant. And so I'm going to leave it sit. It needs to heal. Healing from grief, right? So the end has to heal. Once it heals over, I can put this in some good quality dirt. Again, good quality dirt. And this is going to regrow and it's going to become an entire plant. And so I find that just miraculous. And I don't know if you know on here. So the other thing is if you look down really, really close, there's a little baby one in there too. So again, it keeps evolving. They keep growing. I have so many of these, and I love the geometry, the symmetry. It just makes me happy. And I want to just show you one more thing, and then we'll get into the story. But this blew me away when I found this out. So I think it's miraculous that you can take a plant and you can let it heal over and stick it in dirt and it will grow. That's amazing. But check this out. Now this, when I found this out, I was like, this is so cool. And this might be the scientist in me. So check this out. So this is a leaf that came off of that same type of plant. It starts growing roots, and out of it will grow an entire plant. Now, it doesn't happen instantaneously. This is probably about 4 weeks to get to where we are. But I think the takeaway is that it can be completely broken. It can be a leaf that's broken. It can be a whole section of a plant that's broken, and it can regrow. You could have saved it, Deb. Yes. I mean, this is incredible. And it's just out of just a leaf. Like, here's another one. I mean, to me, this is just magnificent that this can actually happen. And it's literally, you take a leaf. If you're walking in your yard and you can just very easily pluck a leaf off of a succulent, that's, maybe it's your neighbor's. And you can grow an entire plant from it. So anyways, I just find that miraculous. So I wanted to share that with you. Okay, so getting back to the topic of the day. I don't know if I have stuff on my face. Healing from grief. So this is part 2. Last week, we talked about what does it actually even mean to heal from grief, right? So if you want to succeed in anything, if you actually want to heal, and if you want to succeed in anything, you have to understand where you're going. You have to have a target. You have to understand what the goal is. What do I want to have happen here? And so we explored that last week and said, and I told you to think about it this week, what does it mean for you to really be healed from grief? I mean, absolutely, we all want to be happy, but how do you know that you've healed? And I've been thinking about this myself because this is the 10-year anniversary of my son Jackson's life and his death. And I'm like, how do I know that I've healed? Because I feel in my hearts of hearts that I have completely healed, or healed in a way that I feel is really healthy. And I contrast that, and I've talked about this before with, for example, the grief that I experienced with my divorce. I'm not healed with that. There's some stuff I'm still hanging on to. You can say I'm stuck in that. But when it comes to healing from my grief of my son, I really feel like I've moved through everything. I've done a lot of work and I've healed. So for me, I feel like it's not having emotions or thoughts that really consume me. And I want you to consider that today too, if that's what it is for you to feel healed from grief. And in a big way, it's really just, can you be happy in your life? Do you have this cloud over your head, right? And because we all know the feeling of that cloud. We know the feeling of depression. We know the pain of grief, right? I don't have to explain what that is to you, because if you're here, you know what that is, right? So, but what happens, how does that cloud lift? Does the cloud move away? Does it dissipate? What is that for you? So, those are the things that we explored last week. And so this week, we're talking about now exploring all of that, right? So the 3-part series was designed to first define what grief is and what healing from grief is. We're then going to use today to explore healing from grief. And then next week, we're going to talk about, what can you really do? What are the actions that you can put in place to really support you through this process? And if there happens to be a part 4, I'm working on that too. So we'll see how it evolves. Okay, So we talked about not being able to hit a moving target. So you have to understand, what healing is for you. For me, I wanted to be happy, and I purposefully do not use the words I want to be happy again, because if I'm really, really honest, because I'm happier now than I was then, before my loss, right? So I want to be able to say, I want to be happy again. We all want to be happy again. No matter what trauma, what tragedy, what it is that we go through, we want to heal. We want to heal from the grief, and then we want to be happy. But I don't say happy again, because I don't really think I was completely happy before. I was happy, but in a different way. And so, I want you to consider that this is a new opportunity to find a new level of happiness, and a happiness that might be different from the expectations that you had, right? Which is what's causing the grief anyways. But just consider that there could be a new level of happiness. But how do you get there? How do you get there? And how do you take something that's one of the worst things that's happened in your life, and how do you turn that into something positive? How do you grow through that? And how do you work through all of that pain? And there's so many emotions. There's so many thoughts that are going off all over through your head. There are, the interactions that you have, because everybody around you has an opinion, and your friends have an opinion, right? And how are you healing from that pain? And what does that healing look like? And I think it's healing those emotions, and I think it's healing those thoughts. And I think it's important to do that. Sorry. Because if you don't work through all of those things, they will come back to haunt you. And so they say time heals all wounds. I don't think that it's time that heals all wounds. I think that it takes time. So I don't think that we should have an expectation that, you can heal super, super quickly, that a buzzer goes off, right? And then all of a sudden you're miraculously healed. I think that even as I continue to talk about things and communicate, I'm continuing to grow in myself, grow in my sense of who I am and my purpose. And so I think that, the process continues to go on. I think the process does not ever end. But I think, the goal here, what we're talking about when we talk about healing from grief, is how do you get to a good place? How do you get to, and what does it mean to be in a place where you're not haunted by things that have happened? And how can we not be stuck in the emotions that really haunt us? And here's the thing. Anything that you're experiencing, it's all about you, no matter what anybody else did, right? So I'm talking about the big emotions today, like the stuff that will stop you in your tracks. So let's talk about those things. Things like resentment, betrayal, guilt, right? The thing that most people struggle with more than anything with grief, sort of, and the videos that I post that are most popular, the things that people have the most questions about when I write articles, it's grief. It's guilt. Here comes the heavy stuff. And I'll try to keep it light, but I think it's important, right? So guilt is a huge one. And as I was thinking about this, guilt, how do you heal from guilt, right? So we all know what guilt is. Guilt is looking at it and saying, I should have done something different. Guilt deals with all of the shoulds. I should have done this. I shouldn't have done that. I should have been there. I should have been here. I should have treated my body this way. I should have called somebody. I should have checked in more, whatever that is. All of the shoulds, that's guilt. And guilt is heavy. Guilt is heavy, and guilt will cripple you if you don't deal with it. And so one of the number one questions that people ask me is, how do I get past the guilt? I feel so guilty, whether you're a mother who's lost your child, whether you're guilty about something else in your life, how do you get past the guilt? Well, I can tell you that the solution to guilt is forgiveness. And forgiveness is such a hard thing to do, but it is key to everything, right? And we could dive into this really, really deep, but I'm not going to today because I want to just put these things out there and get you thinking about these things. But if you yourself are feeling guilty about what happened or about what's going on, or maybe what you should have done or what you shouldn't have done, if that guilt is hanging heavy on your heart, you need to heal that. And the way to heal that is through forgiveness. And you need to forgive yourself. You need to realize that we are not fallible. I am not perfect. I make tons of mistakes. We all do. But guilt comes around and it sticks around because you can't forgive yourself. So people ask, well, how do you do that? For guilt is such a heavy thing. And yeah, you can say I can forgive myself, but I can't forgive myself. How do I do that? And the way you do that is you forgive yourself in the moment, and you do it one moment at a time. And you say today, when those guilt feelings come up, and you're starting to feel bad, and, a lot of us women, we go into the whole self-loathing thing, right? And this is where we start getting into the bad habits. This is where the food comes. This is where the drinking comes. This is where the shopping comes. There's lots of things that we can talk about that are bad things that we do to ourselves, right? We don't need to dwell on those, but we need to pay attention to them, and we need to see when they're there. So guilt, the solution to guilt is starting to forgive yourself. So next week, we'll talk about how do you really start to do that. Resentment, betrayal, these are all anger. And unlike guilt, the way they differentiate from guilt is forgiving yourself. To get rid of anger, betrayal, and resentment, you got to forgive somebody else. And that can be really hard. For me, it was, I personally had guilt around, my own guilt because of my body. My body is what failed me. Jackson was perfectly fine before he was born too early, and it was being born too early that eventually killed him. And I have a lot of guilt about that because it's like, essentially it is my fault. And but I've healed from that, right? So I'm not attacking myself anymore, right? Guilt is like attacking yourself. And so I can forgive myself. And I know that there are things that happen that I couldn't control. And so it took me a long time to walk through that and to figure out how to do that. And then anger is forgiving somebody else. And you may have heard, the quote that's very popular, and it's funny, I was just looking it up to see who actually wrote it, and they say it's Buddha, or maybe it was Nelson Mandela, or maybe it was somebody else, Pema Chodron. I don't know. There's a whole conversation, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to get into this conversation, but the quote is good. And the quote is, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. And here's the thing, is when you're holding on to your anger and your resentment and you're feeling betrayed and you hold on to that anger, you have anger for someone else, but it likely isn't affecting them. It is affecting you. And so when you can understand that anger is like drinking poison yourself, and it's hurting yourself. And when you can say, I don't want to hurt myself anymore, that's when the anger can begin to dissipate. And I'm not telling anybody that it's right or wrong. I mean, I've got stuff, and my friend Deb here, she has her own following on Facebook, and she helps women that have been mistreated by other men, and women who have been mistreated by men primarily. And it's called Heroic Women Warriors. You can follow her. And, she did a live this week, and I follow her lives and she follows me because we're kind of helping each other out. But here's the thing, is like, she was talking about letting go of some of the anger, and I flat out told her while I was watching, I remember thinking to myself, like, I am not ready to let this anger go. I'm going to hold on to this anger for a little bit longer. And, and this is what we do, right? I know I need to let go of the anger, and I know that anger is like drinking poison for myself. But it's also, at some point, no matter who you're angry at, no matter what's happened, you have to realize that being angry at somebody else is like drinking poison yourself. And then you're expecting the other person to hurt, right? So like, just get a visual of that. Like, imagine this being poison and you're drinking it and you're like, die, die, die. And like, nothing's happening to the other person. It's only happening to yourself. So there are lots of emotions. There are lots of thoughts and things that you really need to take time to work through. And I wanted to take a moment here because I'm always constantly doing research around grief and finding, new perspectives, ways people are looking at things, because it doesn't go away quickly. And I really enjoy hearing other people's perspectives. But I stumbled on what is now the 7 stages of grief. So it used to be, most of us have heard of the 5 stages of grief, right? Which is denial, anger, there's our anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And those 5 stages of grief, the goal is acceptance. And here's a question for you guys, is if you accept the grief, are you healed? Is acceptance of the grief, of the loss, of whoever it is that you've lost and you love, is that the healing? I don't know. I mean, it's something to think about. I think it's important to accept that it happened. I don't know. I would almost put another stage in there, that's like finding your way back to happiness, whatever that is. But anyways, that's the 5. There's 2 more that have been added, that people talk about now. And the first one is shock. So it's that first initial, when things happen, when you can't believe it. And that's differentiated from denial. Denial is once you realize that it has happened, you're like, I don't even want to deal with this. Like, I can't, it's trying to push it all away because the emotions and everything are so intense, that you want to deny that this has happened because you don't want to deal with it. But prior to that and before that is shock. And I like that stage because I think that there is, so many people talk about, funerals and things. And like, I barely remember my son's funeral because I was in so much shock, and I couldn't process anything. And I have glimpses of the funeral and things that have happened, but I can't recall a lot of what happened around there, because I think that I was in shock. So in the 7 stages, it's shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression. We all know depression. And then there's what they use for number 6, is testing, and then acceptance. And we can dive more into the testing point, but I think that what we're doing here and what we're exploring is this testing, right? And so it's the moving in and out of grief. It is thinking that you're okay and then something happening, to Deb, in your example, throwing you back into a depression, right? And so, these processes are certainly not linear, right? And I think shock, for sure, shock is always going to be at the beginning. I think in the beginning, we're always going to, deny what originally happened because we don't want to process it once we acknowledge that it's happening to us. But I think the other pieces are all kind of fluid, right? So anger will come and go. bargaining will come and go. Bargaining is, when you're having these conversations with God or whoever, and you're saying, like, if you just, like, give me another day, if you just do this for me, if I can just have one more chance, right? That's the bargaining. Thinking that if you do something different, right? This is understanding and grappling with this being out of control feeling. Like, if I just do something else, can I have him back? If I just do something else, can I see her again? Whatever those things are. And then depression, Deb, we're talking about this. Depression comes and goes. And I think it comes and goes in our life. And I think that sometimes it's compounded by our grief. And again, it depends on what it is, what's making you depressed. And that's something else to explore. And is it really depression? Or is it just another level of your grief? Oftentimes, when people talk about depression, we think of depression as this clinical thing that there's something wrong with you, right? And it's a way to define the feeling. But depression can be a medical condition that needs to be treated. But depression can also be just part of grief. Like, you're just grieving and it's coming back, and it's your mind's way of giving you a little bit more over time to help you in that processing. Because if this all came flooding, and that's why the shock comes in, is because your mind physically cannot process all of this at once. And so that's why the healing over time takes a while, because your mind gives you a little bit more, and then you process some of that. And then when you've kind of gotten to the next level, then your mind gives you a little bit more, right? And so that's why the depression comes back. That's why anger will come back. That's why the bargaining can come back. And this whole stage, right? Once you've gone through all of these things at least once, now you're in testing. And that testing, I think that's what they're trying to say with the testing, is you're testing, your emotions and your feelings and what's going on. And it's that, I would almost call it processing what's happening. And then again, they always say, at the end, number 7 is acceptance. You tell me, if you accept what has happened, are you fully healed from grief? I think for me personally, this is just my opinion. I think that stopping with acceptance is falling short. Because originally when these 5 stages of grief were written, they were written by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she was talking about the 5 stages of grief up until someone dies, right? So this is the beginning when you know that your loved one. She dealt primarily with older people who were in hospice and she watched people go through these stages of grief before their loved one actually passed away. So that's why it ended with acceptance. But in that scenario, when you know that something is going to happen, and for me, there was this period where they call it anticipatory grief, where I knew that we were ending life support for my son, and I knew that he was going to die, right? And so I knew the end, right? And that's in contrast to other people where you learn suddenly that someone has died, right? So you don't have time to go through some of these stages, right? And it all happens after the fact. So those 5 stages of grief, and now they're calling them the 7 stages, that was originally written for before a death, up until the point someone died. But grief for me is everything after. Everything after. And so that's why I say I don't think it ends with acceptance. I don't know if it ever ends completely, but I would say maybe resolution, right? Once you've resolved all of the things that are going on, because here's the reality, like, this is your life. And if you want to stay stuck in your grief and there's stuff you want to avoid, you are 100% able to do that. And you are justified in doing that. And nobody has any business telling you any different. What I do, and the whole point of Grief Inspired and the inspiration of Grief Inspired, is to say that this doesn't have to be the end, that you can go back and you can work through all of these things, the anger, the resentment, the betrayal, the guilt, the depression. You can question them and you can say, why am I feeling these things? And you can learn more about yourself. And you can find a way to be inspired to create something new for you. And it's a new way of looking at the world. And my 3 pillars of grief, the things that I work on with all of my coaching clients, are your relationship to your grief, your relationship to yourself and what your grief means for me. And this is the big one, right? And then it's also your relationship with the rest of the world, because it's about shifting your perspective. It's about looking at the world differently, because you can't go backwards. And so all of this stuff in the middle, that's your relationship with yourself, and working through the anger and the guilt and the grief and the resentment and the betrayal and all of the things that go on, it's the part that people don't want to deal with. And I get it, because it's time consuming and it's work. It is for sure work. But what I also know is that with all the work and with going through the processing of all this heavy shit that we don't want to deal with, I know that on the other side of that is feeling good about who I am as a person, who you are as a person, about understanding how your grief has affected you, how the loss has impacted your life, how it means something. It means something to you. And it's not just something that horrible that happened to you, because it happens to everybody. Everybody's going to experience loss. But how can you take that pain, turn it on its head, use it as a learning opportunity, and then all of a sudden look back, however long it is, like I can look back and say, holy shit, I am happier now. I know more about who this person is. I know more about this world around me. I know what my values are. I know what's important to me. I know what I'm doing day to day in the world, and that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, because this is the reason why God put me on the planet, because I believe we all have that. And so for me, my grief helped me find that. And it's why I'm here talking to you today. And it's my healing from grief. And I want to help you heal from yours. And I want to give you hope that grief is not an end, that loss is not an end. It's an opportunity, it's a beginning, and that there is hope, that you can be happy again. You can find a new level of happiness that's different from the way you used to feel. Something that's enriched, that's more valuable, that's come out of the suffering and the pain. And there's meaning behind it, right? It's something that you can chew on. And it's something that when somebody asks you, how many kids do you have? You can make a decision to say, I have this many, and exclude your child who has gone, because you know they're not going to understand it, and so there's no point in saying anything. Or on the other side, to be able to choose and say, well, you know what? I had 3 boys. I have 1 who's living. You can decide, and it means so much more, and it's so rich. And if you're early in your grief, and Deb, you are killing it in the grief process, only good things are coming for you. Because you deserve it, because you are worthy, because you're putting in the work. And I promise you that on the other side of the work is meaning and purpose. And that's where fulfillment comes in. What makes us happy? We want to feel fulfilled. We want to have felt like we've done something in the world, that we've progressed, that we're better today than we were before. And healing from grief, that's what it is. That's what it is. Whew, crying, because it's so, it's heavy. But it's where it all lives. It's where the meaning to all of it lives. I want you to get there. I want you to come with me on this journey. So to close out today, I'd like for you to take some inventory of the emotions that are going on with you, the things that keep you up at night, the anger that's festering within inside you, the guilt that you feel for yourself, the resentment for someone else, the way you feel betrayed. Start looking at them and ask yourself, what can I accept? What do I need to work on? What can I accept? What do I need to let go? Where do I need to forgive? And just move yourself forward. Don't make it like a big, just pick one. And if you can just pick one, right? Deb, you said, depression's hitting you right now. Well, look at that. What's making you depressed right now? Like, what is it? Is it, like we said before, is it really depression? Or is it just really being sad because you miss Michael? And that's an okay thing. Like, it's an okay thing. So just pick one. Yes, thank you. Just pick one and work on that area. And when you feel like you're like, okay, I let that anger go, I let that guilt go, I let that resentment go, that's your path to happiness. Your path to happiness is going one at a time. And when it's something that starts bugging you and you're like, you know what, this is starting to take over, right? I'm talking about the stuff that something happens and you start snapping at the people that you love. All of a sudden, you're just like, somebody says something and that anger, you feel that anger come up from your belly. Sometimes it comes out of my mouth, right? That's more about you than it is about what they're saying, right? It's the triggers, right? But it's an opportunity to say, okay, let's just explore that a little bit. So I'm going to leave you with that. And next week is going to be part 3 of the series, and we're going to focus on some very specific solutions. So figure out what the areas are between now and then that you feel like you need to, you need to explore a little bit more. Opportunities for growth, opportunities, to look for happiness. I needed happiness in this area because something needs to heal, right? So it's acknowledging where are the spots. Right? Rumi says the wound is the place where the light enters. Where do you need to heal? Where are the scars? Where's the pain? And we'll talk more next week about what to do about each of those. So thank you so much for watching. If you're watching this on replay, make sure you give me a hashtag replay so that I know that you're watching. And as always, this is on my Facebook page. But what I do is I take them over to, and I post them later on my YouTube page. So if you ever want to come back to this, you can start searching and find it. So this was part 2, Healing from Grief, and we will see you next week. Have a good one. Bye.